A few decades ago, owning a home, raising a family, taking a vacation once a year, and retiring with dignity were considered ordinary goals for the average middle-class family. Not dreams, not luxuries, just life. Today, that same family often feels like it's running a race it can never quite finish. The paycheck arrives, bills are paid, the savings account barely grows. And despite working harder than ever, the finish line somehow keeps moving farther away. So what happened? Did the middle class suddenly stop working hard? Did people simply become worse at managing money? Or has something much bigger been changing beneath the surface for years, without most of us even noticing? Hello, I'm Olivia Vale. Welcome to Nexoryth. If you're fascinated by money, economics, psychology, business, and the hidden systems shaping modern life, make sure to subscribe. Every week, we explore the forces that quietly influence your financial future. Not through sensational headlines or political talking points, but through thoughtful analysis, real-world economics, and the psychology behind the numbers. And I'd encourage you to stay with me until the very end, because the final idea in this video may completely change the way you think about the middle class, and why its disappearance affects far more than people's bank accounts. Today, we'll explore why so many families feel financially trapped, despite earning more than previous generations. Why home ownership has become increasingly difficult. Why stable careers no longer guarantee financial security. And why the middle class, the foundation of modern economies, appears to be shrinking before our eyes. Because once you understand what has been happening, you stop asking, why is life becoming so difficult? And you begin asking a far more revealing question. Who benefits when the middle class can no longer afford the life it was promised? The promise that slowly disappeared. For a long time, there was an unwritten promise at the heart of modern society. Study hard, work honestly, build a career, save your money, and little by little, your life would improve. Maybe not overnight, but year after year. You'd eventually buy a home, raise a family, take a vacation every summer, put money aside for retirement, and perhaps leave something better behind for your children. For generations, that promise seemed achievable. It wasn't perfect. Not everyone succeeded. But for millions of ordinary families, it felt realistic. Then, slowly, something began to change. Not all at once. There wasn't a single moment when the middle class suddenly disappeared. Instead, the rules quietly shifted. At first, people barely noticed. A home became slightly more expensive, university tuition increased, healthcare costs rose, childcare demanded a larger share of the family budget. Meanwhile, everyday essentials slowly became more expensive too. Individually, none of these changes seemed catastrophic. However, when they happened year after year, they began creating enormous pressure. Eventually, many families reached a point where earning a decent income no longer guaranteed a comfortable life. And that's what makes this story so fascinating. Because the middle class didn't disappear because people suddenly stopped working hard. In fact, most people are working just as hard, if not harder, than previous generations. Many have university degrees, professional careers, years of experience. Some even work 2 jobs. Others have side businesses after work. Yet despite all that effort, they often feel like they're standing still. So what changed? One answer lies in something economists call the rising cost of living. Over the past several decades, The cost of many essential needs has increased much faster than people's ability to save. Housing, healthcare, education, insurance, childcare, these aren't luxury purchases. They're the foundation of everyday life. And when the cost of necessities rises faster than incomes, families don't necessarily become poorer overnight. Instead, they become financially fragile. That's an important distinction. Someone may still own a nice car, live in a clean neighborhood, dress well, even take occasional vacations. From the outside, everything appears normal. However, behind the scenes, they may be carrying large debts, living paycheck to paycheck, delaying retirement, postponing medical care, or worrying every month about unexpected expenses. In other words, the appearance of stability remains, but the financial security underneath gradually weakens. And perhaps that's the biggest difference between today's middle class and the middle class of decades past. Years ago, many families worried about improving their lives. Today, many are simply trying to maintain the life they already have. That's a profound shift, because when people stop thinking about moving forward and start focusing only on staying afloat, economic confidence begins to disappear. Consequently, long-term decisions become much harder. Buying a home feels risky, starting a family feels expensive, changing careers feels dangerous, launching a business feels almost impossible. As uncertainty grows, people naturally become more cautious. They spend less, save less, take fewer risks. Ironically, that caution can slow economic growth even further. So the shrinking middle class isn't just a personal financial issue. It's something that eventually affects businesses, communities, and entire economies. Because the middle class has always been more than an income group. It has traditionally been the engine of consumption, innovation, homeownership, entrepreneurship, and long-term economic stability. Which leads us to an even more important question. If hardworking people are still doing everything they were told to do, why does financial security seem more difficult to achieve than ever before? The answer begins with something that has quietly transformed the value of work itself. When working hard is no longer enough. For most of modern history, hard work was seen as the safest path to a better life. The formula seemed simple. Work hard, gain experience, earn promotions, increase your income, and eventually, your standard of living would improve. For a long time, that formula worked reasonably well. Each year of experience often translated into higher wages. A stable career created financial stability, and financial stability created opportunity. However, over the past few decades, that relationship has slowly begun to change. Today, millions of people are discovering something their parents rarely had to face. Working harder doesn't always mean getting ahead. In many cases, it simply means keeping up, and those are two very different things. Take a moment to think about someone starting their career today. They graduate from university carrying student debt. They enter a competitive job market. Housing is already expensive. Rent consumes a large portion of their income. Transportation costs continue to rise. Insurance becomes another monthly obligation. And before they've even had the chance to build wealth, they're already spending most of what they earn simply maintaining their lifestyle. Then, as the years pass, their salary grows, but so do their expenses. Rent increases, mortgage payments become larger, groceries become more expensive. Healthcare costs continue rising, taxes change, utility bills rise. Suddenly, that promotion which once felt life-changing barely changes everyday life. This is where many people become trapped, not because they're irresponsible, but because the cost of staying in the same place keeps increasing. Imagine climbing a staircase, except every time you take another step, someone quietly adds another step above you. You're moving upward, you're making progress, you're putting in the effort, yet the destination never seems to get any closer. For many middle-class families, that's exactly what life feels like. And perhaps the biggest reason is that wages and productivity haven't always grown together. Years ago, when businesses became more productive, workers often shared more directly in those gains through higher wages and improved living standards. Today, the picture is far more complicated. Technology has transformed industries. Automation has increased efficiency. Artificial intelligence is beginning to reshape entire professions. Global competition allows companies to hire talent from almost anywhere in the world. Consumers expect lower prices. Investors expect higher profits. Businesses face constant pressure to become more efficient. As a result, many workers find themselves competing in a marketplace that is far more demanding than it was a generation ago. Skills that once guaranteed stable careers can become outdated within a few years. Entire industries evolve rapidly. New technologies create opportunities, but they also replace certain kinds of work. Consequently, job security doesn't feel as permanent as it once did. Even highly educated professionals sometimes worry about staying relevant. And when uncertainty becomes part of everyday working life, people naturally become more cautious with money. They delay buying homes, they postpone having children, they avoid taking entrepreneurial risks. They save less, not because they don't want to, but because there isn't much left to save. Meanwhile, another subtle shift has taken place. Success itself has become more expensive. A good education often costs more. Professional certifications require continuous investment. Networking, technology, software, transportation, everything required to remain competitive demands ongoing spending. In other words, earning money increasingly requires spending money. That's a reality many previous generations experienced far less intensely. None of this means hard work has lost its value. Far from it. Hard work still matters. Discipline still matters. Ambition still matters. But today's economy often rewards adaptability just as much as effort. The people who continue learning, developing new skills, and adjusting to change are often the ones who remain financially resilient. Because the economy no longer stands still, and neither can we. Perhaps that's the most significant change of all. The middle class didn't simply become smaller because people stopped working. It became more vulnerable, because the economic landscape beneath hardworking families changed faster than many of them were prepared for. And once you recognize that, another question naturally emerges. If work alone is no longer enough to build lasting financial security, then where is the wealth actually going? If everyone is working, where is the wealth going? At this point, a difficult question begins to emerge. If people are working longer hours, if businesses are producing more than ever, if technology has made the world dramatically more efficient, then why does it feel as though financial security is slipping further away? Where is all the wealth going? It's a question that sparks endless debates. Some blame governments, others blame corporations. Some point to globalization, others point to technology. The truth is more nuanced than any single explanation, because wealth doesn't simply disappear, it moves. And over the past several decades, the way wealth moves has changed significantly. Let's start with something surprisingly simple: assets. Imagine two people. The first spends nearly all of their income covering monthly expenses: rent, food, transportation, insurance, utilities, childcare. By the end of the month, very little remains. Now imagine another person. After paying their expenses, they still have money available to invest. They buy shares in companies, real estate, businesses, or other assets that have the potential to grow over time. At first, the difference between these two people may seem small. However, year after year, something remarkable begins to happen. The first person's income depends almost entirely on their work. The second person's wealth gradually begins producing more wealth. Their investments grow, their assets increase in value, their money starts working alongside them. Eventually, they're no longer relying solely on a paycheck. They're benefiting from ownership. And that's one of the biggest differences in today's economy. For many middle-class families, income comes primarily from labor. For many wealthy families, income increasingly comes from assets. That's an important distinction, because labor has natural limits. There are only so many hours in a day, only so many years in a career. But ownership doesn't operate under those same limits. A successful investment can continue growing while someone sleeps. A business can generate income without requiring every hour of the owner's time. A property may increase in value over decades. Meanwhile, someone working full-time often has little opportunity to participate in that growth. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack ambition, but because rising living costs leave little room to build ownership. And that's where the gap quietly widens. It's rarely one dramatic event. Instead, it's thousands of small differences repeated over many years. One family invests consistently. Another postpones investing because every dollar is needed today. One family buys assets. Another spends most of its income maintaining its current lifestyle. Neither decision necessarily feels life-changing in the moment. Yet over 20 or 30 years, the outcomes can look completely different. There's another shift that's easy to overlook. The modern economy increasingly rewards ownership of ideas. Think about the world's largest companies. Many don't own the factories they once would have. Instead, they own software, algorithms, patents, brands, digital platforms, intellectual property. These invisible assets have become some of the most valuable resources in the global economy. As a result, wealth is no longer created only by producing physical goods. Increasingly, it's created by owning systems, technology, and networks. Consequently, people whose income depends entirely on wages often find themselves moving at a different pace than those whose wealth grows through ownership. That doesn't mean success is impossible. Far from it. Many people continue building wealth through discipline, investing, entrepreneurship, and lifelong learning. But it does mean the rules have evolved. Working hard is still important. However, understanding how wealth is created has become just as important. Perhaps that's why so many people feel as though they're running harder than ever, without gaining much ground. They're participating in an economy that increasingly rewards ownership, while spending most of their energy simply earning enough to cover rising costs. And once you begin looking at the economy through that lens, another realization becomes impossible to ignore. Maybe the disappearance of the middle class isn't only about income. Maybe it's about access. Access to assets, access to opportunity, and ultimately, access to the kinds of wealth-building tools that quietly shape financial futures for generations. Because when ownership becomes concentrated, the distance between simply earning money and actually building wealth can become larger than ever before. Can the middle class make a comeback? So, after everything we've discussed, one question remains. Is the decline of the middle class inevitable? Or is this simply another chapter in economic history? The answer is more hopeful than many people expect. Because history teaches us something important. Economies never stand still. They evolve. Industries rise. Others disappear. Technology transforms the way people work. New opportunities emerge while old ones fade away. The world has gone through enormous economic shifts before. The Industrial Revolution changed how people earned a living. The rise of computers reshaped entire industries. The internet created jobs that didn't even exist 30 years ago. Today, artificial intelligence is beginning to do the same. Every generation experiences change. The difference is that some people adapt, while others spend years hoping things will return to the way they used to be. And that's where the future of the middle class may ultimately be decided. Not by waiting, but by adapting. However, adaptation doesn't mean simply working longer hours. In many cases, it means thinking differently about money. For decades, financial success was often associated with finding one stable job and staying there for an entire career. Today, that strategy no longer guarantees security. Instead, many financially resilient people focus on building flexibility. They continuously develop new skills. They diversify their sources of income. They invest in knowledge. And perhaps most importantly, they understand that learning has become a lifelong responsibility rather than something that ends after graduation. At the same time, financial literacy has become more valuable than ever. Understanding how debt works, how investing works, how inflation affects savings, how assets grow over time. These aren't subjects reserved for economists. They're becoming essential life skills because the economy has become more complex and making informed decisions has become more important. There's also another shift that's beginning to reshape the future. Technology has dramatically lowered the barriers to creating value. A generation ago, starting a business often required significant capital. Today, someone can launch an online business, teach a skill, build software, create educational content, or reach millions of people with little more than a computer and an internet connection. Of course, none of this is easy. Competition is intense. Success is never guaranteed. But opportunities now exist that previous generations could hardly imagine. In other words, the rules have changed, and understanding those new rules may become one of the greatest advantages a person can have. That doesn't solve every problem facing the middle class. Housing affordability remains a challenge. Healthcare costs continue to rise in many countries. Education is becoming increasingly expensive. Economic inequality remains an important conversation. Those realities cannot be ignored. However, focusing only on problems rarely creates solutions. The more useful question is this: given the world we actually live in, how can ordinary people put themselves in the strongest possible position? Perhaps that's the real lesson hidden beneath this entire discussion. The middle class was never just about income. It represented something much deeper: hope, stability, opportunity, the belief that consistent effort could create a better future. And while the path toward that future may look different today, those values remain just as important as ever. Because ultimately, the future won't belong only to those who work the hardest. It will belong to those who continue learning, continue adapting, and continue making thoughtful decisions in a world that never stops changing. If you enjoyed this video and want to understand the economic forces shaping your future, subscribe to Nexoryth. Here, we explore money, economics, business, psychology, and the hidden systems influencing everyday life, without sensationalism, without political noise, and without easy answers. And before you go, I'd love to hear your opinion. Do you believe the middle class is disappearing or simply evolving? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The most interesting conversations often begin with different perspectives. Until next time, I'm Olivia Vale. Stay curious. Keep asking better questions, because understanding the world is the first step toward changing your place in it.